For today's cup of coffee, I'm riding solo, so this might not be as exciting as when youngest kid is here. I have a tendency to be more serious than he does. So, yeah. Anyhow, this comes from the Daily Star and is by Richard Brown, December the 3rd of 2022. And it says, a woman who spent 7 years plagued by supernatural events in a farmhouse, dubbed Britain's most exorcised home, has revealed how she was confronted by a menacing hooded figure and was left fearing for her life. Liz Rich and her husband Bill moved to Hellfire. I don't speak Welsh, so I apologize. I'm sure I have butchered that. An isolated farmhouse near Beacons back in 1989 to bring up a family. However, the couple and their young children were quickly confronted by a series of sinister paranormal oddities, including energy surges, dead farm animals, and sightings of two spirits, an old woman who would watch the children play, and a terrifying hooded figure without a face. Seeking solace in the church, the house, nicknamed Hellfire Farm, was exorcised repeatedly. Liz reckons hundreds of times, but still the problems lingered. Liz herself was even possessed in the kitchen of the property. Liz has now spoken exclusively to the Daily Star about her experiences, which featured in both a 1996 book by Mark Chadbourne named Testimony and a new BBC podcast, The Witch Farm. And Liz, who is now 63, states, quote, if you've never experienced anything like this, it must sound like we're making it up. But none of it was made up. None of it, end quote. Before the spooky sightings and possessions began, there were some early signs that not everything was right. A huge electricity bill arrived at the farm, far beyond the amount the family could have ever used, and despite repeated trips to the house, experts were unable to pinpoint a reason. The farm is cut off and isolated in the Beacons, an area long associated with witchcraft and magic. Liz described living there as being in a bubble and said that right from the start the family felt uneasy. She said, quote, there was a feeling that built up. It was so insidious and so gradual that we adapted to it. I guess it must have been like a frog in the boiling water scenario. You could sense something before the real horrors came. Sometimes the house would level out, but then something would happen, and it would become more claustrophobic and more oppressive, like an energy building up. We were living in an unreality. When you came home, you didn't know what was going to happen, end quote. It wasn't long before things began to ramp up. Footsteps were heard on the stairs, farm animals died suddenly, and no explanation and physical phenomena began to plague the house. Liz said, quote, I would always try to look for answers, but the problem is when something happens that you can't find a logical explanation for. How can you be standing looking at a door with your eyes and it closes and makes a slamming noise? How can an oil radiator heat itself up when there's no oil in the tank? That's when I thought there was a serious problem, end quote. Liz and Bill's young children, Ben and Becca, began to see an old woman sitting in the corner of their nursery watching them play. And it wasn't just the children who were affected. Liz also saw the woman through a window in the house before she began to feel a second, more sinister presence. One passageway in the home became the focal point for the problems, and it was there that Liz was confronted by a faceless, shadowy 7-foot figure. Liz said, quote, it was menacing, strong, and sure of itself. It didn't have a face, but it was in the form of a kind of human. I don't think it was a ghost, but there was something evil, something that had been around for a long, long time, end quote. And it was artist Bill who struggled the most with life at the farmhouse. Bill, who separated from Liz and sadly died before the release of The Witch Farm, cut himself off and spent hours locked away in his studio. Liz said, quote, Bill was obsessed or possessed. He was so involved and fascinated by this stuff. It got into his brain. He got so involved and enthralled with it. He went from being a really alive, good-looking guy to being a depressive alcoholic submerged in darkness. The house ate away at his soul. It took away all his self-respect. He was drinking more. He was grumpy, and he became someone who was rotten from the inside out. It eventually destroyed him, end quote. The longer the family stayed, the more things began to spiral out of control, seeking Liz and Bill to approach Baptist minister David Homewood for help. What followed was a series of exorcisms in an attempt to rid the home of whatever was lurking. Liz herself fell foul of a suspected possession at the property. Though she admits she can't remember anything about it, listeners to the witch farm heard how her face transformed and she spoke with a different voice. She told host Danny Robbins, quote, "I felt violated. The thought of some energy having the audacity to take your body even for a short period of time," end quote. The family eventually left the farmhouse, which is still occupied decades on, and Liz moved her and the kids to nearby Cowbridge. Looking back at her experiences, she said, quote, "I know people will just think we're weird people and we're making it all up, but you'd have to have one hell of an imagination to make all this up. It felt dangerous in the house. The kids always slept with me. I wouldn't let them sleep on their own. I definitely felt very threatened there. When you've met evil, ghosts don't scare me now because I've come up against such evil in my life. That's the truth," end quote. Danny Robbins, who created The Witch Farm after the success of his previous podcast, Uncanny, and the Battersea Poltergeist, added, quote, "I think ghost stories are detective stories, and they're equally satisfying whether you're a believer or a skeptic. If you're a skeptic, it's a how done it, and if you're a believer, it's a who done it. Human beings love mysteries, and ghost stories are the ones that keep on giving. With Bill and Liz's story, it's about the realness. I get scared by things that feel real. Bill and Liz are this ordinary couple that moves somewhere more remote, then mad stuff happens to them. You think, quote, if it can happen to me, it can happen to them." Reverse that. If it can happen to them, it can happen to me, end quote. And you can listen to Witch Farm. That's available on BBC Sounds. And new episodes are released on Mondays and are broadcast on Radio 4 at 11 p.m. And I'm sure that you can look up online and find whatever that you need to. I guess since radio, I don't know if that includes videos of the broadcast or what. I did find a clip on YouTube that was from Channel 4 Entertainment, and it's called Story of Hellfire Farm, Best Jump Scare Ever. And so I will leave that link for you. And the clip is very interesting, and it looks like it's well done. I think that there's also a link that they have on the video where you can watch the full production. And yeah, it does have a jump scare at the end of it, but it's also very well made. So I probably will go back and watch the full production. And this is a very interesting story. The fact that whomever it was could not cast out whatever this was. And we know that there's not just demonic forces, there's also earth spirits that are not necessarily demonic, but as far as can they be evil? Well, yeah, it's not that demons are the only thing that are evil or things that are called demons. But when you are in that type of situation, it is like the boiling frog scenario. That it's, and you have a tendency to gaslight yourself. It's like, well, maybe I really didn't see that. Maybe it was just, and you start doing these excuses for whatever it was that you experienced. And it's interesting because that the gentleman, Bill was his name, was an artist, and people who are artistic are a lot of times more sensitive to different entities and energies. And that includes not just visual arts, musicians, anything like that. So it wasn't surprising that whatever this supernatural entity was had a greater impact on him. And he either wasn't, I don't know that he was unwilling as far as the participation, because if he was fascinated by it, if he was enthralled by it, In some ways, that's almost like an invitation to whatever this was until it had already taken him over. So when you've got a situation where you have paranormal things like that, especially when you've got animals dying and the dark forces and stuff, you really want to do something then, or to just move if at all possible. It doesn't have to be a pissing contest on those things. Because if it's between a human being and a supernatural entity, a lot of times the human is not going to bode well in that situation. So let me know what you think in the comments about this story. I'll do Kid's part since he isn't here. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. If you do have experiences with the paranormal or supernatural, encounters with UFOs, aliens, cryptids, if you perchance have heard of this Hellfire house, maybe you're over there in the UK and this is a familiar story to you, send me an email, cupofcoffeewithscream@gmail.com. The email address and the link to the story will be in the description box. Know that you're loved. If you have had any of these experiences and you don't want to put it in the comment section, that's why we offer the email address. If you just want to share it with someone, then that's fine. We do ask that if you want it made into a video, that you do give us permission to do that, because everybody needs an outlet, especially when people have had something that's unexplained. They're a lot of times afraid to talk about it, that people will think they're crazy. We don't think you're crazy because of our experiences. Now, we're in no position to point a finger and call anybody else crazy. So know that you're loved, and we'll see you on the next cup. Bye.